Hans, and today I'll be talking to you guys about prep time and teamwork strategies. Um, some of the seminars, to answer the question in the chat, some of the seminars are built on each other, but generally speaking, it should be okay if you haven't attended seminars in the past and take this as like an introduction to how to approach prep time and teamwork. Okay, so let's just get uh, the presentation running. One second. I do have screen share permission, right?
Let me just check. Can you check now?
Yep, I think it should be working. Let's see. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Cool. Is this presentation visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, wonderful. So the topic for today's presentation is prep time strategies and teamwork. And what I'll be doing in this presentation is I'll basically be taking you guys through how to approach preparing for debates. So in the allotted prep time that you get before each round, and then because debating is a team activity and you are preparing for each round with your team, some general tips on how to like create a positive team environment and how to work in a team when you're doing this activity. Cool. Okay. Just like an obligatory notice at the starting, you are not allowed to screen record or in any other form record the session. Anyone who's found in violation of this will be banned from all future ISDS events or sessions like this. You are, however, like encouraged to take copious amounts of notes if you so wish. Okay, cool. So basically, this session will happen in three parts. First, just a general overview of what really happens in prep time and how we as debaters, we can get the most out of it or make it as efficient or useful for us. Second, a quick list of like tips and tricks to use in prep time so that your prep is more fruitful and it's better for your team. And thirdly and finally, how we can maintain a positive team environment and really like make sure that everyone on team likes each other, is generally comfortable working together, because at the end of the day, debate should be a space where everyone feels comfortable and has fun while they learn and grow. Okay, cool. So firstly then, what happens in prep time and how can we get the most out of it? Usually, in ISDS national selections, and generally like in the format of debate that most of you guys will be doing, prep time is a grand total of 1 hour long. And what you see on this on the slide there is just a general overview or like a breakdown of prep time. So just quickly, I'll just go over like each component. So from 0 to 5 minutes, you have a silent brainstorm. From 5 to 10 minutes, you share out. From 10 to 15 minutes, you work on your team's stance. From 15 to 20 minutes, you decide on your team's argument split. From minutes 20 to 40, you decide on your first speaker's arguments. At minute 40, your team splits. From minutes 40 to 45, different speakers do different things. So the first speaker finishes writing their speech. The second speaker develops their own argument. Third speaker, and if there are any non-speaking members, they work on things like POIs and rebuttal. And in the last 5 minutes of prep, the team reconvenes. And this is where you want to do things like have final checks on case, have a short rebuttal discussion. And ideally, when you go into the debate round, you already have the first POI or point of information that you're going to ask the other team. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to take you guys over each individual component of prep time, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. This is an important slide, so feel free to note down the exact timings of how you'd like to break down your prep. This is an approximation of ideal prep structure, of course, because not all preps go the same. You can make small adjustments depending on the individual prep that you are in. But yeah, I'll give you guys like 2 minutes to like note down the structure, because generally speaking, like this is a pretty useful structure, and outside of like sessions like this, I'm not sure if anyone else will tell you how to do prep. So yeah. Okay, has everyone noted down this rough structure of prep? Cool. If anyone hasn't, just let me know. Okay, wait. Second. Okay, 1 sec. I'll give you guys like another minute then. One second. Sorry, some slight tech issues on my end. Just take another 30 seconds to finish noting down prep structure. Okay, cool. So let's now start talking about like each individual component of prep and what exactly you should be going about doing in those times. So the first component of prep, which is the first 5 minutes, 0 to 5 minutes, is silent brainstorm. It is called a silent brainstorm because you're supposed to be silent in it. So for the first 5 minutes of prep, what you want to do is you want to be silent. Each member of the team just sits down on their own, notes down the motion, and thinks about the motion themselves. So what do you want to do? You want to be quiet. And how do you want to go around approaching the motion? You want to do three things that are generally pretty useful. The first is you want to underline important keywords in the motion. So for example, if you have a motion that's say, this house would ban gambling, a keyword there would be ban, because it's an important question that you have to answer. What would such a ban look like? And so on. So important words in the motion that give you hints as to what your side has to support in the debate. The second important thing is you want to read the motion at least 3 times. And I know this sounds silly, but it happens more often than you think. Oftentimes, you will have cases where you either misread parts of the motion and say you run the wrong case, or you misread parts of the motion such that you think that you were on the other side when in fact you were not. And that leads to very funny situations. So I was at a debate tournament this weekend, and my partner basically told me that we were the proposition side on a certain given motion. And then 13 minutes into prep, once we were well into like preparing for the debate, he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Hans, I've messed up. I read the motion wrong. The way it was worded was confusing. Actually, we're opposition." And so it was not a very fun prep as a result, right? In order to avoid situations like that, you want to read the motion very carefully and multiple times. Again, this might sound silly, but it happens more often than you might expect. The third and final thing you want to do is, ideally, because you are a team of 3 to 5 different people, you want to give each person within the team a different role. So you might want one person to think about what your team's stance is in the debate, what exactly you have to support, what's your model. You might want to have someone else think about the arguments for your side. So like all the reasons why you should, like your side should win. And you might want to have like a third person thinking about what the other team could run and how the other team might respond to your arguments. The reason why you want to do that is because if you get each person in silent brainstorm to be preparing something different, that basically maximizes efficiency. So you waste less time where everyone spends the same time thinking about the same things, and then everyone has to work more to like get to other things that you need in prep. What should you not do in silent brainstorm? The first thing is don't talk. It's silent time for a reason. It's called silent brainstorm. There'll be plenty of time for talking later, 55 more minutes of prep, basically literally the rest of your preparation time. Second, fairly self-evidently, don't read the motion wrong. Don't be like my teammate yesterday, because that just ruins everyone's day. And the third is don't be unstructured. So you want to ideally think about the motion in a very systematic way. It's what's written in the do's column, right? So you want to underline motion keywords, read the motion very carefully, and then start thinking about what your stance is, what the arguments are in the debate. And we'll talk more about like generating stance and arguments later on. But yeah, that's the first component of prep. The second component is share out. Share out lasts from 5 to 10 minutes of prep, right? What happens here? After silent brainstorm, this is when you start talking. But it doesn't just mean that you just start talking however you want. Instead, the way in which share out works is each speaker gets a minute to a minute and a half to basically share with the rest of the team the ideas that they have at the end of their silent brainstorm. You want to go in speaker order. So the first speaker starts sharing out, then the second speaker, then the third speaker, and then the non-speaking members. Now, the important thing to note about share out is ideally you should not be interrupting your teammates. So a quick guide to like whether or not you should like interrupt a teammate while sharing out is in the flowchart there. Is your teammate rambling? Are they repeating themselves? Or like, are they being unclear? If yes, then you may tell them to hurry up and like wrap up what they're saying. If they are not rambling, the question you should ask yourself is, are the points they are telling you making sense or not? If the answer to that question is yes, obviously don't interrupt them because they're like sharing valuable information that will be useful for you in prep. But even if you think that their points don't make much sense, don't interrupt them, wait for them to finish. The reason for this is twofold. The first is you don't know whether or not they might actually have a good point, right? Even if it doesn't seem very intuitive or good to you, it might be the case that your other teammates think differently. And in any case, it is useful to have like as broad a picture of what you guys might run in the debate as possible. But secondly, you just don't want to interrupt your teammate because in any case, you will have time for constructing the actual case later. Right now, you just want to get everyone's ideas out. So that's the important thing. In silent brainstorm, be silent. In share out in turn, and don't speak out of turn. Okay. Once share out, sorry, wait. 1 second. Yeah. So here's the thing, right? Generally, some important tips that you could use to make your brainstorm and share out better is one, in brainstorm, you could give each team member a different role, a different thing to prepare. And second, within share out, remember not to repeat contributions. So if like a speaker who was sharing out before you has already said certain points that you had thought about in brainstorm, when it is time for you to share out, you don't need to say those points. You don't have to repeat those contributions. Can someone tell me why it is good to like not repeat contributions and share out? Like anyone, you can just like raise your hand. Okay, so wait. Joy, could you please pick someone out? Because there's something weird going on with my Zoom.
Yeah. Are you able to present?
No, I'm able to present. It's just I can't see the people on the Zoom meeting. So if I ask a question, could you just like pick out whoever raises their hands?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Just give me a
Thank you.
moment. Yeah, I think it should be visible for you. People who want to speak, they can speak.
No, I'm saying that I'd asked a question, right? So like, could you just pick out someone who has raised their hand to answer?
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think the reason is because it's inefficient and it wastes time, and repeating the same points doesn't really add any value.
Yep, that's basically it, right? So like, don't worry about like having your points taken from you. Remember that like it's a team activity, and what matters at the end of the day is like if your team is able to maximize their efficiency and use time as efficiently as possible within prep. So yeah, don't repeat contributions and share out. Okay, what's the next thing to do then? From minute 10 to minute 20, you want to do two things. The first thing you want to do as a team is you want to figure out your stance in the debate, right? So basically, what does your side support in the motion? And the second thing you want to do is you want to like get an argument split out. So you want to like know what arguments you're going to be running in the debate. A couple of things then. So on stance, how exactly do you want to go about thinking about what your stance should be? It's very simple. It's like just a 3-step plan as to coming up with what you have to support in the debate. The first is just ask yourselves the question, what does the world look like right now? And are there any problems with the world? The second question you want to ask yourself is, what should the other side support? What does the other side have to support? Are there potentially any problems with that? And the third and final question, which helps you make your own stance, is what do we have to support under the motion? What does the motion say that we have to defend? Right? So that's just generally how you go about making your stance. It's fairly simple. When you're generating arguments, however, it becomes a little more complicated. And there are multiple ways you can go around figuring out what your arguments are going to be. The first way in which you can think about making arguments is in terms of stakeholders. So stakeholders are basically people who are affected by the debate, right? And so as a quick exercise, if, for example, you have a motion that says this house would ban homework, what are like two different groups of people who could be like affected by this debate? Anyone can answer.
Yeah, so like in the example you gave, um, who would be affected? It would be the parents, students, teachers.
Correct, right? So presumably in that debate, you would probably want to run one argument about students and how you help students. You probably want to run one argument about teachers and how you help teachers. You might choose to run an argument on parents, you might not want to, but like when you think about stakeholders, you also need to ask yourselves, which are the most important stakeholders who are impacted the most by the debate? Who are the most vulnerable stakeholders who we need to help, who we should care about the most? And based on that, you can figure out which arguments you want to run. The second way in which you can think of generating arguments is by scenarios. So what I mean by that is oftentimes there will be a debate which is asking an actor to do a certain action, and how they react to that might give you separate arguments. So for example, if you have a debate that goes, this house would not give developmental aid to countries with poor women's rights records. The way you could think about making arguments in that debate is like this. If you are the leader of a country that has poor women's rights records, and the international community tells you, hey, if you don't improve your women's rights records, we will stop giving you developmental aid. What are the two things you could do? There are two actions that you could take then as a leader of such a country. What are they? And again, anyone can answer.
First, like the leader could be very receptive to that information and could change and improve. Or second, the leader could not take that information into consideration and continue to hoard money. And the developmental aid, which once went to the people, would now not go to the people, and the leader would still be like profitable.
Yep, that's basically correct, right? So you as the leader of such a country could either choose to go along with the threat of like the withholding of developmental aid and say, okay, fine, I will improve. That becomes your first argument, right? So you try to prove why it is that these countries will likely improve their women's rights records and why that's really good. But then your second scenario is an even if scenario, as we call it. It's basically, even if these guys decide to be really stupid or evil and don't agree, why is it still good? So this could probably mean if you have a country that's like really, really oppressive, you probably shouldn't be giving them money anyways, because that money is probably going to be, as you said, hoarded by the leaders or used to like oppress their citizens further or whatever. A really good example of like scenario argumentation is the 2018 WSTC finals between India and China. If you haven't seen that debate video, I suggest you go watch it. You can search it up on YouTube for after this session, where basically the motion was this house believes that the West should stop all arms sales and military cooperation with Saudi Arabia. And India on proposition basically runs two arguments in first speech. The first going, I mean, they run multiple arguments, but one of the arguments they run is, here's why Saudi Arabia will stop doing very bad human rights abuses. But even if they don't, here's why, like, we still get really good human rights impacts. The third way then, in which to think about generating arguments, is again, really simple. It's in terms of impacts. So what are the different things that could happen as a result of a certain motion being passed? In many ways, it's very similar to the first two kinds of ways of generating arguments. So presumably there will be a different impact on each stakeholder, right? Teachers and students will react differently when you ban homework or don't ban it. Similarly, different scenarios or options that certain actors might take, that governments might take, will result in different impacts happening. But generally, the most direct way to think about generating arguments is just, what are the different impacts that this will have on the world? Okay, the final thing to note on stance and argument split is a note on clarity. What do I mean by that? Two things. The first is, when you're making these arguments, you're not just like thinking of the argument titles, right? So in this time period, in this time from 10 to 20 minutes, you're not expected to fully mechanize all of these arguments with like 3 reasons for why the problem exists and 3 consequences and 3 ways in which your side solves it. That comes later. But you should have some rough idea of what your argument is trying to prove. So for example, in the motion, this house would ban homework. Presumably, if you're running an argument about how you have better mental health for students, you might want to have a rough idea of, okay, we're going to try to prove why homework is uniquely bad for students' mental health and why banning it solves that problem. So just generally have like a rough idea of what you're trying to prove within the argument. The second thing is this. So in the WSTC format, you are expected as a team to have 3 arguments. 2 arguments will be run by a first speaker and 1 argument will be run by a second speaker, right? Now, obviously, you should have 3 arguments. If you don't have 3 arguments, probably you messed up somewhere, and that's not great. However, I will say the 2 arguments that your first speaker is going to run are the more important arguments, okay? And so if you're in a situation where when you're having your in prep time, when things get a little messy and you're not sure like whether or not you can run certain arguments or you're finding the motion difficult, you should prioritize getting 2 arguments out first before worrying about the second speaker argument. The reason for this is, if you don't have a second speaker argument, it's bad. But if you don't have a complete first speech, it is catastrophic, because the majority of your case has to come out at first speech. And therefore, you should prioritize getting 2 arguments for first speaker out if it comes down to it. But this is like a worst case scenario. Ideally, you will have decided on 3 arguments by the end of 20 minutes of prep time. Okay, why are you showing me? Yeah. But generally, just a note on like argumentation, right? So some motion types will have quote unquote stock arguments. That is like basically, when you see a certain kind of motion, you can usually tell what the general argument splits are going to be. So for example, if there's a motion on higher education, that is to say a motion on universities, you will have an impact on students, you'll have an impact on teachers, that is professors. The professor's impact will usually be on which side do more people want to go into teaching. And obviously, if less people go into teaching, that's bad because you have less teachers to do education for students. And there's an impact on research because universities, in addition to like teaching students degrees, also often are like sources of research that does a lot of social good for humanity. Second, if you have a motion on banning things, so this house would ban gambling, this house would ban alcohol, then usually speaking, there is a principle on choice, whether or not people should be given the choice to do this activity or consume this substance. If your proposition, you'd say, yes, you should be given this choice. Opposition would be like, this choice is probably not legitimate because this activity is addictive or this substance is coercive or something. And probably if you're banning stuff, you will have an impact on black markets. Which is to say, proposition will be like, here's why banning it will be effective and black markets won't be a problem. And opposition will be like, here's why black markets will actually be a massive problem and will cause more harm than good. And thirdly, motions about whether or not social movements should do X or Y. So basically, this house believes that the feminist movement should do something. This house believes that the environmental movement should do something, etc. In those kinds of debates, there's usually like a pretty clear structure of argumentation. You'll have a principle on the movement's obligation. So what is the purpose or the duty of the movement? And does the motion fulfill it or violate it? Second, there'll be an impact on which side the movement is able to reach its goals faster. And then there'll be a third impact on which side is the goal itself a better thing to work towards or aspire towards. Obviously, not all motion types will have stock arguments, but this is just like a useful primer for thinking about the kinds of arguments that you can run in different sorts of motions. Okay, 20 to 40 minutes, argument construction. This is probably the most important part of prep. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so what exactly do you do in this time period? Essentially, what you do is you just make your first speech, right? So at this point in the prep, you already have done the stance. So you have your model, you have your framing of the world, and your first speaker knows what that is. Now, the two most important arguments your team is running, the two arguments that are being run in your first speaker speech, those are now constructed. And how are they constructed? It's very simple. It's just you follow argumentation structure, right? So what are you trying to prove? What is the problem that you're trying to prove in the world? Give reasons for why that problem exists. What are the consequences of that problem? Why is that really harmful? And then finally, how does your side solve that problem? Generally speaking, 3 tips to make this a little easier or to just make it better. The first thing you want to do is you want to stress test your arguments. What that means is you want to, at each stage when you're constructing your arguments, you want to be thinking to yourself, okay, how could the other team respond to this? And ideally, if you're able to, you want to build in some responses to the responses that you expect from the other team. This is so that when the other team responds to you, you don't get blindsided. And this just makes your arguments a lot stronger and more resilient to rebuttal as the debate goes on. Second, at each stage, so once you've made one argument, or when you're in the middle of making one argument, let's say you've identified a problem in the world and now you're constructing the consequences. At each step of the way, you want to check in with your entire team to make sure that everyone is on the same page. You want to make sure that everyone knows exactly what is going on in each argument and why exactly you are proving what you are proving. Can someone tell me why it is really important that everyone is on the same page when it comes to what you guys are running in the debate? Why is it really important that everyone has the same idea of what your arguments are going to be?
Because if everyone doesn't have the same idea, that would cause a lot of confusion in the group themselves, and that would give a chance for the opposition to raise a question on proposition.
Yeah, basically that, right? It causes a lot of confusion because oftentimes, if you're not doing check-ins, you actually don't know that your teammates haven't understood the case until the debate is literally going on. And then your first speaker comes up and you're like, hold on a second, this is not what I had in mind in prep when we were prepping this argument. And that's really, really scary. Because one, if you and your other speakers have a different idea of what the case is, it makes your case sound really contradictory and allows the other team to attack you on that. But second, it's just incredibly disorienting where it's like, oh my God, what has gone on, right? So basically, in order to prevent your speakers from going rogue, which is the fancy debate phrase for this, and that's the picture I've included in the bottom left, in order to prevent your speakers from going rogue and making life difficult, really difficult and scary, you want to make sure you have a check-in after each portion of argument so that everyone is on the same page as to what you guys are running. The third and final thing that I want to note is oftentimes when motions are a little more complex, or when prep is a little messy, or just when your team is having a bad day, you might find yourselves in the unideal situation that you're over time. So you might be 30 minutes in, but you're still not done with the first argument. You might be like 39 minutes in, and you still have a significant part of the second argument to do. In these situations, you should keep calm and not move on until you are reasonably confident in the strength of your first two arguments. Why is it? Can someone tell me why it's really important to prioritize the first speech in prep and making sure that those first two arguments are as strong as possible over like anything else?
Yeah, so basically the reason why the first argument is the most important, because that's the foundation of your the foundation of the debate. Because let's say the first argument is weak, opposition can attack that and like ruin your case from the start itself. And it's very difficult to pick up the pieces from there.
Yeah, basically that, right? Good answer. If your case is not confident sounding from the starting, it makes life harder for the rest of your team, right? And this is why when you're 40 minutes in and you maybe don't have a first speech ready, even if you as a second speaker are really worried about like, what's my argument going to be? Or if you as a third speaker are really worried about like, oh, I need to preempt what the other team's case is going to be, your first priority always has to be your first speaker. Because like if first speech does not go well, or if first speech has big holes in it, it makes everyone else's life a lot harder. And also just like specifically, I have unfortunately seen a lot of second speakers in my time debating who like, I mean, it's understandable that you'd freak out if you don't even know what your argument is at that point in prep, but like, it's not the end of the world. You can like always come up with that argument later. The priority should be your first speaker. Okay. Why does it keep on showing the slide I made? Okay. When you're constructing an argument, here's a useful tip. It's useful to have each team member play a different role. So what I mean by that is two people can work on mechanizing the argument itself. So giving reasons for the problem, the solution, all of that stuff. One person can stress test by thinking of potential responses. And that's like, how will the other team rebut our argument? How can we rebut those responses? And then one person can look at the broader case line and make sure that the argument is fulfilling your burdens. Think of this last bit as like, is the argument actually doing what the motion requires you to do? What I mean by that is this. The day before yesterday, at the same debate tournament that I was talking about earlier, there was a motion about whether or not India should join a certain free trade agreement, right? So like in a free trade agreement, what you see is things like tariffs. So that's like import taxes are reduced and like countries can trade more freely with each other. So I saw a team run an argument about why lifting tariffs is good and that will help improve trade. The problem was the motion was not just about joining a free trade agreement. The motion was about India joining a free trade agreement. So they failed to explain how the Indian economy or India's industries would uniquely or specifically benefit from the lifting of those tariffs. And that opened them up to like a lot of attacks from opposition. And they didn't have a very good time in that round. And so the point is, you could have an argument that is well-reasoned, that proves what it seeks to prove, but it's proving the wrong thing. Or rather, what it is proving is not really that tied to the motion. In debate land, we call this a problem-solution mismatch. So while you have 2-3 team members working on the argument itself, making sure that it makes sense, making sure that like the most obvious responses for the other team can be dealt with, you also want one person to be looking at whether or not the argument itself is worth running. You know, the whole like, some people have to worry about if or how to do something. Other people have to worry about whether or not they should do something. So, okay. Now, from minute 40 to minute 60, this is like the last phase of the prep. And oftentimes, this is the phase that I think gets missed out on a little bit by a lot of teams. And so this phase is actually really critical, important. Why is this the case? So at minute 40, the team basically splits up. What does the first speaker do? The first speaker fleshes out their speech. What does this look like? Sometimes if the first speaker wants to say add more individual reasons to each argument, they can do that. If they want to do things like add examples to their speech, if they want to write an introduction, this is the time when they do that, where they basically turn their speech from like the skeleton that has been discussed in prep. So, okay, here's our stance, three things under stance. Here's 2 arguments. Under each argument, we have a list of 3 reasons and 3 consequences. This is why they turn it from a skeleton of like reasons and logic into something that, sounds really good and sounds really impactful. So like all those fancy introductions, usage of examples, cool language, rhetoric, your first speaker adds all of that over here, which is why it's really important that the first speaker does get this time to themselves. Because like you ideally want your first speech to be really, really impactful for the judge, right? Now, if the second speaker at this point in time doesn't really have an argument yet, this is where the second speaker has to work on that argument. So ideally, when you were discussing your argument split by minute 20, you guys had a clear idea of what your second speaker argument would be. If you didn't have one, it's not great, but it's not the end of the world. You'll have like 15 minutes to work on it, right? So this is why the second speaker sort of like writes out their argument. Ideally, the second speaker should be working together with one more speaker, and they will discuss this argument together before the second speaker writes it. If your team has 4 or 5 members and there's 1 or 2 non-speaking members, this is the point where the remaining speaker, where the remaining team members, so the non-speaking members, this is where they work on rebuttal, which is where they prep the other side's case and figure out how to respond to that. And they also think of points of information to ask the other side. If you are a 3-member team and you don't have any non-speaking members to spare, the third speaker will be the one who's working with the second speaker on their argument. After the basic argument is decided on, the second speaker will go off on their own to write their argument, while the third speaker then works on rebuttal and points of information. All of this happens from minute 40 to minute 55. At the 55th minute, with 5 minutes left to go in prep time, the team should reconvene. Why is it really important to reconvene? 1, because you want to go over the case as a whole, right? Again, this is the final check-in to make sure that everyone is on the same page. This is your final check to make sure that everyone has understood everything and there is no big part of the case which one of your team members has not understood. Because you ideally want to make that discovery now instead of in the debate. Second, because it might be the case that you haven't thought that much about the other side at this point, it is important for the third speaker to brief the other 2 speakers on, hey, these are the possible attacks that might come from the other side. Just be ready for them. And thirdly, and finally, just so that like there's an extra oomph factor of impact on the judge, you want to decide a very nice and very rhetorically sound point of information that you can ask the other team. So yeah, this was like the broad structure of prep time. Before we move on, I think we can pause for like 2 minutes if there are any questions. Okay, cool. So minutes 1 to 5 is essentially the silent brainstorm, and minutes 5 to 10 are shared out between team members. So minutes 1 to 5 is basically all team members just silently sit on their own and think about the debate and the motion. Minutes 5 to 10 is where each member in turn share out what their thoughts are after brainstorm. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, okay. So up until, if you're unable to come up with a third argument, that is not great, but it's not the end of the world. Up until minute 40, everything has to be focused on making sure your first two arguments are as strong as possible. Okay? Once that is done, then like second speaker and third speaker, you guys can sit together and try to figure out a third argument. Usually the way in which you think of a third argument is the same way as you usually generate arguments, right? So are there any more stakeholders that we might have missed? Are there any scenarios that we might have missed? Are there any impacts that we might have missed? Okay, wait, so which parts of the first 20 minutes couldn't you understand? Like, did you miss it, or like, could you not? Okay, but look, the TLDR of the first 20 minutes is just the first 5 minutes. You guys don't discuss stuff. You guys just silently on your own, each of you individually. So the first 5 minutes is you just each team member individually reads the motion and thinks about what ideas they have. From minute 5 to minute 10, all the team members, they share their ideas. From minute 10 to minute 20, you guys just figure out the basics. So your stance, what is your side defending? And then after that, you guys want to discuss what your arguments are going to be. Also, like, I'll answer the last two questions in the chat, but after this, no more questions. If there's time at the end of the the session, we'll take questions then. Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second. 1 second. What is going on? Optimize for video. Give me 1 sec. There's something wonky with my Zoom. I'm really sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. Let me see. Right, sorry. I'm gonna keep my video off for like the next 3-4 minutes or so while I figure this out. But anyways, let me just quickly answer the remaining questions in the chat, and then we'll move on with the presentation. So if the third argument is repetitive in terms of impact, so the answer to that question is have a third argument that is not repetitive. But no, in the event that you can't come up with anything, just still run a third argument, because you don't know whether or not there might be a new strand of analysis that you might just come up with at the last moment, if there's like a way in which you can expand upon the impact or whatever. It is a deeply unideal situation, and the right answer is just have a unique third argument. But if you are in that situation, run the argument. Okay, so this question is really good. Should there be a leader who can moderate, or should it be everyone's equal responsibility? I'll actually get that in the next section where I talk about like prep leading. And it's actually like it's interestingly raised the question, because like we do need to have like a more in-depth chat about it. So moving on to the next section of this presentation. Yay, okay, I think video is back on. Wonderful. Awesome. So let's go. Cool. So we're done with the first section, which was this broad overview of what happens in prep time and how to like be maximally efficient in each part of prep time. Okay. Part 2, quick prep time tips and tricks. This is where you guys get all of that, all of those like very nice actionable things you can do in prep time that ISTS likes very much, because it helps make your prep time a lot more efficient. Beyond just get good at prep, here are a few things that you can do to make prep more efficient. Okay, so the first thing you can do is you want to maintain sheets. By sheets, I literally mean sheets of paper. Okay, what are those sheets? You want to have a stance sheet where you write your stance. You want to have a case split sheet where your 3 arguments are written. You want to have an examples sheet where, you know, someone writes all of the examples for your team. If you want to have a POI sheet where fairly like self-evidently you write down the POIs that you want to ask the other team. You want to have a rebuttal sheet where whoever's been thinking about the other side's case, typically this will be the third speaker, notes down how you can respond to it preemptively. And finally, you want to have a parking lot sheet where if there are any disagreements in prep and certain ideas where some speakers are not sure whether or not you want to run it, while other speakers want to run it, you put that in the parking lot. Okay, why is it a good idea to have sheets for your team? Can anyone tell me?
Yeah, essentially, it makes it really easy for all the team members to look at something they're confused at without asking or disturbing another team member, especially when you're writing. So I can just look at the argument sheet instead of asking my team member.
Yeah, basically that, right? So for example, if the team has split off and everybody is now working on their own arguments, but one team member is confused, if they don't want to disturb the flow of like the prep, okay, you have your stance sheet there and you can figure out how like your stance might provide the solvency to a certain argument. Or if you just want to like recheck what a certain argument you guys are running is, grab the case split sheet and look at the exact wording of the title. But more importantly, as you also said, it prevents confusion, right? If someone is confused. I think I have spent a lot of time in this presentation talking about not fun experiences where different team members had different ideas of what we were actually running. But yeah, look, I've been debating for like a reasonably long time, and I'm telling you guys, it happens more often than you think. So whenever there's a chance to minimize the possibility of misunderstandings between team members, you want to take it. And sheets are a really, really good way to do it. The one caveat there, though, is you ideally want your sheets to be written out by the member of your team who has the most legible handwriting. So when I was debating for India, my handwriting is not particularly easy to read or legible. And so we quickly figured out that it was a mistake letting me maintain the sheets. We selected another one of my teammates. So yeah, just keep that in mind when maintaining sheets. But by and large, sheets are like a really, really good way to maintain clarity in prep. Again, it seems like a very small thing to do, but it does make a big difference. Cool. Okay. The next thing that you can then do is having a prep lead, and this will answer your question, whether or not you want to have someone to guide prep. So this is a little complicated, right? Mainly because prep lead does not mean, because prep lead has like means certain things and does not mean other things. What do I mean by that? What exactly is it? What exactly is the job of a prep lead? And I'm telling you this as someone who was prep lead for Indian developmental teams for 2 years. The first thing that's your responsibility is you need to guide the discussion. So you want to go, okay, what do we think is the first thing we have to prove in this argument? What do we think is the next thing we need to prove? So generally just keeping an eye on the overall structure of the case and figuring out what exactly is it that we want to be doing with our arguments? What is the end point we're trying to prove? Second is you want to prevent the discussion from getting sidetracked. So if there's a quibble over like a specific reason within an argument, if maybe one of your teammates is just really enthusiastic about a certain example and keeps on talking about it, you want to be like, okay, I get it. This might be important, but it's not the most important thing we can do right now. There are more important things we need to do. Let's move on. And just like making sure that your arguments are actually focused and proving what they need to prove. The third thing you want to do as prep lead is you want to keep track of time and keep the discussion moving. So, okay, guys, we have 3 minutes left until we hit minute 40. We have a big chunk of our second argument to still flesh out. Let's be a little more efficient in terms of preparing for it. Generally speaking, that's what a prep lead is supposed to do. Guide the prep in such a way that it's more efficient. What is a prep lead not supposed to do? The first thing you shouldn't do is dictate the case. You have teammates for a reason. They also have brains. In some cases, they will be better at proving certain things than you. Being prep lead does not mean you are better than your teammates. It's just you're the person who's been given the responsibility of making sure prep is efficient. So one, don't dictate the case. It's a collaborative effort. Second, don't attempt to micromanage every aspect of prep. What I mean by that is literally there will come a time in prep at minute 40 where your different teammates will split off to do their own thing. And just like trust your teammates to do their own thing. Trust your first speaker to write their own speech. If they have a problem, they'll probably come back to the team and ask for help. Similarly, like when the discussion is happening, you don't feel the need to like be the most contributive or whatever. Just trust in your teammates as well to be able to think up of reasons too. Third, okay, I misspelled it, but don't be a petty little tyrant. If like you're in a team of like 5 and 4 of your teammates think what you want to do is a bad idea, just take the hint and go along with it. So yeah, the basic TLDR of being a prep lead is the reason why a prep lead is useful is because you need someone to guide and track and focus the discussion. What a prep lead doesn't do is boss their teammates around. And there's a fine line to draw between those two things. So think of it less as like leading prep and think of it more as just being the responsible person who has to like be like, okay, we should be proving this, or we need to be moving on now, essentially. The reason why it is sometimes, okay, wait. I'm going to assume that my screen is not blurry for everyone because I'm seeing like, I'm not seeing more complaints. That's the issue. If it is blurry though, like, do let me know. Cool. The reason why it is still useful to have a prep lead though is simply because in a debate room, in a prep room, when you are making those arguments, it's very easy for you to get sidetracked, to get carried away, right? If you think you have like a really cool idea, you might just want to keep on discussing it, even though the others have already understood it and are like, okay, cool, we get it. We have our reasons. It's fine. We need to move on now, right? Similarly, if you're someone who's like just really nerdy about a certain debate topic, so this was me with international relations, you might just want to like geek out over examples and be like, there was this case study where X country did something really cool. And like, fine, it's really interesting. You might use that example in the debate, but it's probably not the most efficient use of prep time, right? So to prevent those kinds of things, to prevent people from getting carried away in prep, you want to have a prep lead to continue guiding prep, is sort of how you want to think about the role of prep lead. Of course, in my case, though, like we had the funny situation where the team member most likely to get carried away in certain motions was also the prep lead, i.e. myself. And so whenever we had a motion that was international relations as the topic, I had to keep on telling myself, don't get excited, don't get excited, don't get excited. But yeah. Okay, I don't know why the pro tip slides have, okay, cool. But what you can do, I think, is, because ideally before like you take your school teams to national selections, you'll probably be doing a bunch of like practice rounds or practice preps to see how things are working, right? So what you can try to do is you can try splitting prep time roles between different people. So you can have one person to keep track of time, one to keep track of the relevancy of discussion, or you can switch around the role of prep lead between different members of your team from prep to prep before you're finally able to figure out which one is the best suited to each role. Because really this is something that you won't know until you are doing those preps. And then you realize, and then each person can like sort of grow into their own strengths and grow into their own roles. Typically speaking, there is no single speaker who is the most suited to be prep lead per se, right? And this is because the qualities that you need to be a good prep lead are not necessarily the same as the qualities you need to be a certain kind of good speaker. So you have to be responsible. You have to be willing to like keep the discussion moving. You have to be responsible to be the unpopular one sometimes and be like, look, guys, the discussion is getting sidetracked. Let's get back on topic. So different prep leads often have different speaker roles. So I was prep lead for my team. I'm a third speaker. But for example, the WSDC's team prep lead for the last 2 years was their first speaker. And so like, it really doesn't matter. Just figure out who your prep lead is by switching them around for different preps. Or maybe like, if you find 2 or 3 people who are equally good, just like have a different prep lead for each prep. That works as well. The point isn't so much who is the prep lead, but that it is useful to have a prep lead for every prep that you do. Cool. Finally, I I feel like a big fear that a lot of people have in prep is what if they disagree with like their teammates? What if you have differences in prep? This is like the ISTS secret solution to like figuring out how to get over disagreements in prep and how to like make sure that they don't affect your team's performance in the debate. The first question you need to ask yourself is whether or not the disagreement is about something important. So what exactly is something important? It could be like an argument. If it's like a whole argument and like two speakers disagree on whether or not you should even be running it, then yeah, that's a pretty big disagreement. However, if it's a disagreement about something like, oh, should we use this example? Or, oh, is the third reason under the solvency of our second argument the best thing that we could run, or should we like replace it? That's probably not that important. Okay. So the first question you ask yourself is the disagreement about something important? If the answer is no, if the disagreement is about an example or a specific reason, it's fine. You don't need to like stop prep for it. You don't have to, you don't need to discuss it immediately. If it's something that's not vitally important, if it's not something super important to your entire case, this is what the parking lot sheet is for. See, sheets are very good at maximizing efficiency in prep. And they're also very good for helping you resolve differences. But yeah, put it in the parking lot. Later on in prep, if you have time, circle back to it. And maybe by then, you'll have thought a little more about it. You'll be a little calmer. You'll be able to figure out what you want to do with it. That's what the parking lot is for. But if the answer is yes, if you guys are having a disagreement about whether or not to run a certain argument, if you guys are having a disagreement about what the world looks like or what stance you guys should be proposing, then that's a little more serious. So the next question you ask yourself is, can it be solved by a quick 3-minute discussion? By rule of thumb, what I mean by a quick 3-minute discussion is 1 minute of thinking. So 1 minute of silent brainstorming where each team member thinks about the issue that's being disagreed on again, where they reconsider their own opinion and have to think about whether or not what the best thing to do in the debate is. And then after that, 2 minutes of discussion to quickly come to a consensus and figure out what you want to run. If the answer is yes, wonderful. You do your 1 minute brainstorm, have your 2 minute discussion, solve the problem. Great. If the answer is no, then ideally the answer should not be no. Because ideally, I think it should be pretty apparent by now, you want all your team members to be on the same page. But if, say, you spend 5 minutes on it, you spend 6 minutes on it, and the speakers are unable to agree, as a last resort, and only as a last resort, you can put it to a vote. This is something which I thankfully have not ever had to do on any of the teams that I've ever been on. But if it comes to it, put it to a vote and move on with prep. But ideally, in the vast majority of cases, you'll either realize the disagreement is not about anything very important and you can put it in the parking lot, or a 3-minute discussion or a 5-minute discussion will solve the problem. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. No, the parking lot sheet is, so when I was talking about the different sheets that you want to maintain in prep, the parking lot sheet is basically a sheet where you put all of the ideas that you're not sure whether or not they will actually be in your case. So if your members disagree about running a certain example or having a certain reason, you write that down in the parking lot, be like, we're not sure if this is going to go into the final case. We will come back to it. Okay. Cool. That's on resolving differences. And that's basically it for the quick tips and tricks. It's pretty simple, honestly. Step 1, to recap, step 1 is maintain sheets because that helps to keep everyone on the same page. Step 2 is have a prep lead, or like just generally speaking, have someone in prep who's there to make sure that your prep is focused and doesn't get sidetracked. And step 3 is the flowchart I just shared to you, that I just shared with you about how to resolve differences in prep. Okay, now we come to the third part of the presentation. Beyond prep time, how can we create a positive team environment? Before that, any questions? Okay. Yeah, so what if all teammates are online? I think what you can do is you can have like a separate Google Doc. So if you're online, I'm assuming, so if you're online, what I would suggest is you could deliver. So if you're online, there are certain speakers who prefer preparing on paper and just discussing with their teammates online, and there are certain teammates who might prefer to collaboratively work on Google Docs. Ideally, if you're prepping online, I would recommend you keep Google Docs. And so you can have a separate Google Doc for all the sheets, and then you can have a separate Google Doc for your prep and your case. And because like Google Docs are a collaborative platform, everyone can like look at the sheets at the same time. Yes. To answer Tejas's question, yes, you come back to the parking lot sheet in the 40 minutes to 60 minutes. Typically, you'd like, worst case, it's like at 40 minutes before you like break off, before the speakers split, you want to come back and be like, here's our parking lot sheet. Let's review these. Have we come to a consensus on what to do? Worst case, if there's still no consensus, at minute 55, when the team reconvenes, come back and just blip out those problems. What are sheets? Yeah, cool. Sheets are basically literally just sheets. So they're sheets of paper on which you want to write important things. So you want to keep a sheet for your team's stance, where you write your team's stance, what your team is supporting. You want to keep a sheet for your case split, so where you want to write the different arguments that your team is running. You want to keep a sheet for POIs, so the points of information you want to ask the other team. You want to keep a sheet for rebuttal, so the speaker who has been thinking about what the other team will say, they can write the responses that they might run to this hypothetical other team on that. And then you want to keep a parking lot sheet, which is for things that you don't know whether or not you will put into your final case, or things that speakers disagree on. Those are basically sheets. And sheets are important because they just help everyone stay on the same page. Okay, what can we do when your teammates just do not listen that day and the environment is not at all productive? Yeah, look, that's tough, right? Ideally, it doesn't happen. But I think if it happens, the important thing to remind yourself is just, look, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it's just like, you guys are anyways going to have to go into the debate. And so it doesn't help if like you're not willing to listen to your teammates or not be productive. I think then as prep lead, you just kind of have to like decide on like how you want to handle the situation. And honestly, like it would be very different, like depending on the individual team dynamics of each team. But generally speaking, unless the prep is completely dysfunctional, like you have a team member who is literally just being incredibly uncooperative and not listening to anything you say, unless that happens, just you need to find a balance where you're like, okay, as long as we generally agree on what our case is trying to prove, let's try to do that to the best of our ability. Okay. Wait, so Anantha, I'm not sure what your question is. Like prep time is the time in which you prepare for like the debate, right? So like in the WSTC format, you get 45 minutes, but for national selections, you have 1 hour of prep time for each debate. And arguments are basically reasons for why the judge should vote for you, or like arguments are basically reasons for why your side is good and should be supported. Like basically points for your side. Okay, wait, Lokesh, what do you mean by isn't it difficult to discuss any important points in between an online debate? Like this, so yes, within the debate, if it's while the debate is already happening, if it's online, it might be difficult to communicate in between speeches. But like presumably before the debate, during prep time, your entire team was preparing for the debate together, right? And that's what this session is about. And so that's when like you guys are presumably all on the same call together, deciding on what your case is going to be, because presumably your team prepares for the round together and not individually, right? And so yeah, then just have those discussions. Cool. Are there any more questions? Cool. moving on to the next section then. How can we create a positive team environment? Because after all, debating is a team activity, right? Cool. So here are 3 places where teamwork is really important. In prep, obviously, in debates, and in housekeeping. What is housekeeping? So housekeeping is basically all of the other things you have to do as a team member that don't involve preps or debates. Does anybody have an idea of what like these housekeeping or logistical things could look like? Like, what are your other responsibilities? What are other things you have to do as a team member that don't directly involve debate or preparing for debate?
Maybe it could be something like pep talks, like if your teammate is underconfident, how to cheer them up and how to make them like, I believe in you, you can do this, etc., etc.
Sure, pep talks is one. That's good. Any others? Like, what are other things you have to do? So,
we would need to keep the team together. Like if
Sorry?
like 2 of the other members of the team are having like a quarrel, you would need to sort out the quarrel.
Yeah, so look, fine, sure. A lot of like interaction things between your team fall under housekeeping. But what I was thinking, but more importantly, there's just like a lot of like smaller things that you have to do that don't involve giving speeches or preparing for debates or even interacting with your teammates. It's very simple things. Like, for example, making a Google Drive. If you're going to do an online tournament with your team, making a Google Drive where like they can share Google Docs and where they can all prep together, right? Or it's something like, if you guys are going to do a tournament or if you guys want to do some practice over that week, making a schedule for all of your teammates, figuring out when everyone is free. It could look like in between rounds of the tournament, making sure that like just checking in on everyone, making sure that they're getting enough sleep, making sure that they're walking around and touching grass, making sure that they're eating and drinking water and keeping hydrated, and all of those things, right? All of those like very unglamorous, not directly related to debate things, those very like logistically oriented tasks, hence the name housekeeping, but which are nonetheless incredibly important for the functioning of the team. So yeah, the most important, like oftentimes being a good teammate is about more than just being really good in prep or like helping win a debate by giving a really cool speech. It's often also just compiling a Google Drive with like lists of like different cases that you're prepared, or like doing things like making a YouTube playlist of different debate videos you think your team should watch to try and improve. A bunch of smaller things. Well, I mean, I say smaller, but like really they're very important and do require a significant amount of effort, but other housekeeping things in general, right? So the reason why housekeeping is important is because it essentially does 2 things. The first is it ensures that your team knows that you care, right? That even outside of the debate room, outside of prep time, you care about the improvement of this team and that you want to improve and that you want to that you're taking this activity really, really seriously and that it means a lot to you. And that's obviously really good for like attitude and team spirit. But second is it just makes life easier for everyone, right? Like if people are willing to proactively like take the first step to coordinate when to meet for practice, if people are willing to make each other's lives easier by sharing important links or collecting important online resources, important documents and files in one place, but where it's easily accessible, it makes life easier for everyone and just generally improves the effectiveness of the team as a whole. Okay, but obviously housekeeping is one part of it. But then there is the kinds of teamwork that's really important in debates. Okay, there's going to be 2 parts to this. First, I'm going to talk about teamwork in debate rounds. Then I'm going to talk about teamwork after debate rounds. There's usually 2 different types of teamwork that you can do in rounds. The first is active coordination. What does this mean? There are generally 3 important things you want to note. First, the debate doesn't end with your speech. after your speech, you should not stop listening to the debate. You should do things like think of points of information to ask those points of information to the other team. Can someone tell me why it is that you should not stop paying attention after your speech is done?
This is important because that would help us for the rebuttal round, which is a very, very important scenario at the end of the debate.
Yep, sure. Makes sense. Anybody else?
If you are the first or second speaker and your team by chance does not have a third argument or something that the third speaker can say that's not rebuttal, listening to the other team can actually help you get better.
Yep. That's exactly right? Basically, there's just a lot of different ways you can still contribute to the debate, even if your speech is done. And so you should always be seeking those opportunities to contribute, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you give a good speech. If your team doesn't win, you don't win either. And debating is a team activity. Second really important thing, and as a third speaker, I feel the need to personally speak to all of my fellow third speakers and even second speakers. Don't be selfish. If you have a good piece of rebuttal that you think is like a speaker before you, so if you're a third speaker, maybe a second speaker. If you are a second opposition speaker, maybe the first opposition speaker. If there is a good piece of rebuttal that you think would be appropriate to bring up in the next speech that your side gives, give it to the speaker in front of you. It's okay. You will have time to think of more rebuttal on your own. Yes, you might be tempted to save up material for your own speech, but the later you leave it, the greater the chance there is that the other team is able to respond to the fewer weaker responses your team has given and make their case stronger. So you basically want to batter the other team as soon as possible, as hard as possible. And the key to doing this is for third speakers and like responsive speakers, not just to be listening to the other side, but also actively passing on rebuttal to their other team members. It's the same principle as with focusing on the first speech in prep time. You need to have priorities. Don't be selfish. It's a team sport. The third and final thing is you should coordinate to fill in gaps as the debate goes on. What I mean by this is if your second speaker is like, okay, I have responded really well to this one argument that the other team made, and I've kind of taken it out. But I wasn't really able to respond as well to their second argument because I didn't have enough time and I had to bring out my own argument. Then you as the third speaker then should fill in the gaps. You should dynamically respond to how the debate goes. You want to then spend more time focusing on the areas that your second speaker missed out on, maybe spend less time focusing on the areas that they've already won, right? This obviously will have to be figured out on like a case-by-case basis as debates go on. But basically, this is why it's really important to be paying attention to every single speech in the debate to keep on like making sure that everyone knows what's going on. The difficulty, of course, is how do you communicate with your teammates in the middle of a debate round? I'm assuming most of you guys are going to be doing like online national selections, in which case it's actually really easy. Just like create a WhatsApp group or like create like a social media, like just have a group online where you can talk to all of your teammates in the middle of a round and just like send text there being like, hey, notice that you missed this. Do you need me to cover anything for you in rebuttal? Or hey, here's a POI idea I had. If anyone wants to ask it, they can, and things like that, right? Makes coordination much easier. If you're debating in person, it's a little harder. But typically what you then do is you either whisper to your teammates because you're all sitting together, or you just pass slips of paper with what you want to say to them written on it. But yeah. Okay, next up. This was active coordination. The second kind of teamwork in rounds is indirect support. So, in addition to the fact that you can definitely contribute to helping your team win the debate, even if your speech has ended, the other thing you have to do is when your teammates are speaking, you need to look at them like you need to make it very clear that you're paying attention to their speech. You want to nod, You want to like smile at them and generally like make it seem like, you're paying attention to their speech and you think their speech is really good. Why is it really important for you to pay moral support, for you to give your teammates moral support like this? Can someone tell me?
Yeah, actually, I was just answering your previous question, so I don't really have a question right now. But I just wanted to ask, will we get these slideshows for like reference in the future so that I have the notes?
I'm actually not sure. Wait, Joy, what's the policy on slideshow?
Yeah, just to confirm, you'll be getting recording of the session.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, but back to the question I asked. Why is it really important to give moral support to your teammates?
This is because it would like help boost their self-confidence, and they would be able to work in a more friendly manner in a team.
Yep, that's good, right? Basically, it's really good for your self-confidence when you're going up to speak, to know that your teammates are listening to you and to know that like your teammates think that what you're saying makes sense or that you're making a good point. Therefore, smile and nod and look very confident whenever your teammates are speaking. In addition to the fact that like your teammates will appreciate you for it, it could also be the case that the judge is also like noticing that and is like, okay, fine, these guys are confident in the case that they're running, they're competent. The second thing you want to do is you want to take notes of the debate for future reference. Right? This is fairly obvious. Even if your speech is done, there should be at least one member on each team who is noting down each speech in the debate. Why? So that after the debate is done, you can go back over your case, be like, okay, here's what we could have improved. Here's what the other team said that we weren't expecting. Here are the weaknesses in the other team's case that we could have exploited. How could we have gone about doing it better? So it's just much easier to improve in the future if you have taken notes of the debate. And by taken notes, I mean taken very, very detailed notes. Typically, if they're non-speaking members on the team, this is what the non-speaking members are supposed to do. They have to take excruciatingly detailed notes of the entire debate. If not, then it's just whichever speaker is done with their speech. In addition to thinking of POIs and passing down rebuttal, they should usually be the ones who are noting down what's going on afterwards. Okay. Next, teamwork outside of rounds. What do I mean by that? Let's see. The first thing that I just want to ask you guys is, how do most of you feel immediately after a debate round? Like right after the debate ends and you guys walk out of the room, or you guys leave the Zoom meeting, before you guys know the verdict, whether you've won or lost. How do you feel in those 5 minutes between the debate ending and the verdict coming out?
So whenever we like the judges still clarify, like he or she is preparing the result, we always start to discuss whether we'll lose or whether we'll win. And then we also start to talk with our opponents and, just have candid talks with them just to, know them better and know how they prepared for the debate, or maybe certain things that we always wanted to ask because their case was too good, or maybe there was something else which was there.
Okay, so those are things that you talk. How do you feel? And to be clear, yes, you do want to interact with your opponents after each round. That's good. You want to have some respectful, polite conversation, get to know the other teams that are competing. But how do you feel immediately after a round? Yeah, just anyone who wants to answer, just unmute and yeah, anxious, right? And mostly I think of what could have been better.
I usually feel really relieved after debate rounds regardless of the verdict, because either I did really well or I didn't do my best. But either way, I've done something, and like
Fair enough.
I've gotten past it, so it kind of makes me feel relieved.
Cool. That's actually like a really, really good and really positive attitude to have. And like whoever like in the session is if like that's the way you feel after debate rounds, that's great. You're in a good place. And you will probably be a net asset to your team if you're talking to them after the round. But for those of us who feel more anxious after the round, who are like worried about how the round went, the important thing here is it's often a good idea to not immediately start discussing whether or not you win or lost, whether or not you won or lost. And it's oftentimes a good idea not to immediately start talking about how you guys could have done better. Okay? So maybe some general comments like, yeah, okay, the round was a close round, or like we did our best, or like the other team was quite good. But it's generally not a good idea to like launch like a detailed discussion about, what happened or what could have happened, because it tends to like stress everyone out and you can't really change anything now, right? Because the debate is over. This has there's two different scenarios or like two different implications of this. The first is in terms of giving feedback to your teammates. So in the cases where like you don't have a coach or someone observing you who will give you feedback, if it's just you and your teammates, usually at this point in time, also just as a general rule, don't give feedback to people unless they ask for it. But if you must give feedback to someone, don't give it to them immediately after the debate. This is A, because you might just make them feel really bad, especially if the debate's not gone well. But B, because your own perception of the debate is likely to have been influenced by the fact that you were just in the debate. And so you ideally want to give it some time and just like wait for the verdict to come. And after the verdict has come, the first thing you can do is usually the judges will give you an overall adjudication or like a reasoning for why they gave the verdict the way they did. And after that, you should be able to ask judges for feedback. And after that is done, then have a discussion with your team about the round. The second implication is what to do if you felt like your speech was really bad. What to do if you felt like the round was really bad. So if you felt like your speech was personally really bad, you might feel a very strong, and to be clear, I'm not sure how true this is for you guys, but generally speaking, like, because like this PPT was in many cases informed by my own experiences debating, I know like a concerning number of people who come out of each debate being like, oh my God, my speech was horrible. So this is for like all of those people out there. If you feel like you've given like a not great speech, there's often a very strong urge to be really self-deprecating, to be like, oh my God, I'm such a bad debater. Oh my God, I was useless in the round. Why is it a bad idea to be self-deprecating? Okay, wait, okay, so now that I am actually looking at the Zoom chat and not my PPT, let me see if I can, okay, why is my Zoom acting up again? Okay, I cannot in fact see who has raised their hand. So someone who hasn't answered so far, you can, if one of you has raised your hands, just like unmute and talk. Yep, sure.
I feel that we shouldn't really do that because then in the future there are two outcomes which could be possible. First, we could just like end up debating altogether because we're too sad over our first few arguments and like first few tournaments which we already lost because it was like our first time. And second of all, it could also make our self-confidence go considerably low. And then if we already have a lot of rounds left, then that could affect the future rounds as well. So not just the present round, the future rounds in that same tournament as well.
Yep, that's fair. Does anybody else have a different answer? Anyone? Okay.
Honestly,
yeah.
oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, honestly, if you genuinely did that bad and then you say it out loud, that means you probably know what your teammates think, and it just puts the team in an awkward situation when they don't know how to respond if you genuinely did bad. But it's a different case for those people who, regardless of how they did, they just have that one standard line. It's like, oh, I could have done better. Oh, I did so bad. So honestly, it puts the team in an awkward position where you can't really think about anything else.
Yep. So that's all of that's really fair. It might impact self-confidence or self-image. It might impact team dynamics in a bad way. But more than that, I think there's a difference between being self-deprecating and constructively criticizing yourself. What I mean by that is self-deprecation is like just going, oh my God, I'm just such a bad debater. Constructive criticism is being like, yeah, I thought my speech in that round could have done several things better. I think I was not able to do X, Y, or Z sufficiently, and I need to figure out how to do that in the next debate. The difference between these two things is this. Constructive criticism is constructive. It points out what the problem is, and it leaves space for you to figure out a solution. Whereas being self-deprecating doesn't really contribute anything. It doesn't really have a point. You're just being like, I am bad. And that's fine. It's fine to feel that way. I mean, it's not great that you feel that way, but like, okay, you might feel that way. But the reason why you shouldn't like make it really, really obvious or be self-deprecating is because it's basically a call for attention, right? It's asking your teammates to say console you or just generally talk to you about it in a way that often isn't centered around what the actual issues with your speech were or how you could have improved. And it might draw time and emotional energy away from like having a more productive discussion about what happened in the round. So yes, constructive criticism, good. Self-deprecation, try to avoid it. But generally speaking, I guess the gist of like this whole section of like teamwork out of rounds is just look at the clock icon in the presentation. Basically, you want to take a step back and take a couple of minutes to breathe before you start talking to your team about the round. And by a couple of minutes, I probably mean like 15 minutes at least, probably more like half an hour, because immediately after the round, I would suggest don't talk to your team about how the round went in detail. Just be like, yeah, we did our best, or like, okay, close round, or good round. And generally speaking, like if anyone's very nervous, give them a pep talk. But save your detailed conversations for after the verdict has come out, after you've gotten feedback. Generally speaking, you're all much calmer then, have processed things emotionally, and there's less likely to be unproductive discussions. Cool. Finally, the last step to having a positive team environment is to make sure that you actually like your teammates. And how do you like your teammates or get to know them better? You do team bonding. Typically, because debaters are nerds, there are a lot of bonding activities that you would probably end up doing that involve doing something debate related. But there are also some like non-debate related activities. So sorry, 1 second. I will stop sharing screen. Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah. So on team bonding, what are some fun debate related bonding activities that you guys think that you guys could do with your team? Yeah, Abira?
I feel like playing games and then, maybe playing games and having candid conversations about various other things could just make a good bond with your teammates so that you don't have arguments in the future during the prep time, so that you have a better understanding between you as friends.
Yep. But just generally, like, so there are some like debate related activities you could do that yes, I mean, okay, so wait. Yep. So like there are certain like team
Uh,
bonding. Yeah, Jehan, go.
yes, sir. How about like just light arguments over random silly topics because it can still help you interact with your team and it's not as competitive as actual debate.
Yep.
So
Yep. So just generally like a lot of things that you could do, right? Like just generally how you'd like bond with your friends. You can talk to them about stuff, play games together, etc. In terms of like more debate related activities, you can do things like, I don't know, watch debate videos together. You could do things like just prep really random motions for the heck of it for fun. Like really weird motions, like this house would ban pineapple pizza. I don't know, something like that. But like a bunch of like non-serious debate activities that like help you guys bond as a team further. Okay. This was section 3, creating a positive team environment. Do we have any questions? I'm going to take like 3 minutes to answer those in the chat then. And let's go over the ones that are first about teams. You don't necessarily have to be friends with your teammates.
Okay, so sorry. So there was this motion which it was like this house would allow individuals to take a pill which would make them content in life. So with this motion we struggled so much and the prep time got over and we couldn't get even one argument because it was so much like setup based. All whichever point I was the first speaker and whichever point I came up with, my like teammates said that this was the argument which the opposition could give, and that's how all the prep time went away. So how are we supposed to deal with these things when like you don't understand the motion at all? Nobody understands.
I think 2 things. The first thing is if you have a motion that you don't understand, you need to remind yourself that probably it's because the motion is just difficult. And so the other team probably doesn't understand the motion that well either. What this means is twofold. A, don't be scared. You might not know what you're doing. Other team probably also doesn't know what they're doing. But B, it probably means that the arguments you might run, while imperfect, are still arguments that can win you the debate. Which leads me to point number 2. If you don't have arguments, ideas, or like if it's a case where certain members of the team think that these arguments aren't valid, the question they should be asking themselves is, do they have an alternate argument or case that is better and actually works? Unless they do, you kind of have to run with what you've got, right? And so you might be in a bad situation where you're running arguments they're not very confident in, but they're the only arguments you have. So yes, you should then, in those cases, default to running those arguments. Yeah, Jehan? Your hand was raised. Okay.
sorry, sir. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, if you're like mid speech and prop slips up, I mean your or whatever your team slips up, then can you like interject and finish their speech for them?
No, you cannot do. Debate is a team activity. You have to let each speaker complete their speech. That's the point, right? It doesn't matter how good of a debater you are. At the end of the day, the team performance is what decides things, and that's often what you need to figure out. So yeah, the way you fix that is just have a prep where you make sure everyone's on the same page. Okay, last question before I move on to the final section of like this presentation. Yeah, Ishi. Ishi, is that how you pronounce your name? Or is it Ishi? Also, if you're speaking, I can't hear you. Yeah, I can't hear you. Could you like put your question in the chat? Okay, cool. So moving on then to the final part of like this session. It technically isn't part of like prep time or team building strategies, but it is part of like preparing for debates. And so see this as like a bonus to the presentation. Okay. Cool. So the final section then that I'm going to talk about is how to prepare for prepared debates. So instances where you get the motion a couple of days or a week before the tournament starts. And yeah. Cool. So how do you prepare for prepared debates? Essentially, the first thing you want to do is you want to have a regular prep for your prepared debates. What do I mean by that? Yeah, my screen's not visible because the presentation's ended. This is now just like a bonus part of like, this is like the fourth thing that isn't directly related to prep time or team strategies, but is, I think, important in terms of preparing for debates. So the first thing you want to do for a prepared round is you want to have a regular prep for it. So take your team together, get on a meeting and have a 1-hour prep and see what arguments you have at the end of it. Then over the next couple of days, the second thing that you then want to do is you want to make sure those arguments are good. So just take more time. If there's a certain part of the argument that you're having a hard time proving, think of more like reasons. Come up with more consequences and all of that. And the advantage you have is that this is a prepared motion. You can take multiple days to flesh out your arguments. And the third and final thing then is either if this was like a really setup heavy debate, or if like you think that your case is severely lacking in certain bits of analysis, research the topic. And when I say research the topic, I don't just mean Google up the relevant facts or like the basic facts surrounding the topic, but also look for things like opinion pieces. If it's something like, look up things like opinion pieces, recent news articles where the topic was relevant, things like that. A, to find out examples that you can use and potentially like apply the reasoning behind those examples to your case, or B, to just get an idea of what the debate is going to be about. And hopefully at the end of it, you should have a prepared case that is reasonably strong. Cool. Okay, so last 5 minutes, we have some more time. So I'll answer questions. So first, with regards to the questions that are in the chat. Okay, first question on like online debates and is it possible for teammates could be on a separate call? Yes, you can do that. So like if you're in a Zoom meeting and your team is in a Zoom meeting during the debate, your team could be separately on a WhatsApp call. And over there, in between speeches, you guys could be discussing what to do. That is perfectly valid. It might be a little difficult because if people are talking on the main Zoom meeting and you're on a separate call, it might be a little harder to coordinate. But if it works for you, there's no reason why you can't do it. You can do it. How do we identify if the motion is research heavy or logic heavy and focus prep around that? Look, motions are always logic heavy. So you always do need to have a regular prep where you sit down with your team and go, okay, how do we figure out stance and 3 arguments? And how do we mechanize those arguments? As for whether or not a motion is research heavy, it's pretty easy to tell. It's pretty easy to tell because if you look at the motion topic and think to yourself, I have no idea what this is about, it probably means it is research heavy. So for example, if you get a motion that goes, this house prefers a world where instead of the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslav states in the aftermath of the Balkan Wars had adopted Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. If you get a motion like that, and you are like, what do these terms mean? I don't think it's reasonable for the average person to know what this is. It probably means it's a very research-heavy motion. So typically you'd have a lot of IR motions, a lot of finance motions, a lot of economics motions, but also some like politics and sports motions that like require a certain amount of research. Case-by-case basis, basically. But generally, if you get a prepared motion and you're like, this topic stumps me, then it's probably a good idea to do some research beforehand. Okay, how to respond to like a really self-deprecating member? I think just immediately what you need to do is just be like, look, I get that you're feeling really, really bad, and fine. Maybe it might be valid for you to feel this way, but instead of like talking about this, instead like let's just take a moment to step back and look at your speech and look at how the debate went. Maybe it either wasn't even all that bad, or maybe like let's try to be more productive and see how we could like actually fix things. Okay. What to do in 15-minute preps? The answer to that is just as you debate more and more, you will get more used to prepping on short notice. And unfortunately, like there's no like quick fix to it. But typically, look, national selections is 1 hour preps. If it's a 15-minute prep, presumably like everyone else is going to struggle similarly as you. So don't worry about it too much. Just do the best that you can do. Shorten brainstorm time to like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Try to get your stance out by 5 minutes and spend 5 minutes on each argument. So yeah. While prepping, to what extent should we consider rubrics? Not at all, really. Like when you're prepping, the focus should just be how can we win the debate? Don't think about individual rubrics. Just be like, because typically speaking, yes, you are marked on certain rubrics, but at the end of the day, I would say having a good case will naturally, so normally speaking, just having a logically sound case will naturally mean you get marked highly on content, style, strategy, right? Because the format that you guys are doing, WSDC or Asian parliamentary or British parliamentary, most like debate formats that you're probably going to do if you're attending this masterclass, they're usually ones that like put a premium on content and strategy, less so on style, and even less so on things like data. So generally speaking, approach prep being like, what's the best case that we could make? How can we prove what we're doing? And don't give that much thought to individual rubrics. Unless, of course, it's a debate format that's really unfamiliar to you, in which case, sure. Okay, there's one more question I got. Why are debaters usually referred to as nerds? Because some of us are nerds. Like, yeah, I'm a massive international relations and history nerd. It's not a bad thing. I'm quite proud of my nerdiness. And if you are a nerd, so should you. But anyways, if there are no more questions, that's great then. We have finished the session 1 minute ahead of time. Yeah. Okay, no, so look, in response to the Oxford question, yes, at Oxford, I'll probably be doing British parliamentary a lot, in which case, content, logic, etc. Yeah. And generally speaking, British parliamentary, Asian parliamentary, and WSCC are the most popular formats. If you're trying out for Team India, it's probably like you're probably going to be debating a lot in the WSCC format. In which case, like the WSCC rubric prioritizes content and strategy really heavily, style as well. But like things like data and all of that, not at all. So yeah, cool. Thank you so much, guys, for joining in the session. If anyone has like any further questions.
Sir, like I missed the first class, so like how do we get like selected into the national qualifiers? Like how do we represent India? Like
if you have this national selections process is on the ISDS website. If you have any further questions regarding the ISDS selections process.
So sir, if I have a bad team and I am a good debater, so will they select me and not my team, or will I just be downmarked and sidelined because of my bad team? Because I've seen some cases where one teammate is like 73 and the other teammate is like 80 marks.
Yep. I mean, it depends, but generally speaking, there have been cases where, like, to be clear, my first ever national selections in 2019, I was the only person from my team who made it to the next round. So yes, there are definitely cases where if you do your best and you are good, you will be selected. But you don't know. I mean, like, look, debating is a team activity at the end of the day, right? If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to ISDS. Joy has put the email ID in the chat. So if you have any further questions about the national selections process, if you want to reach out, feel free to email that email ID and we'll be in touch. And before we go, just as an obligatory thing, follow ISDS on social media. It's very good Instagram content. If you're not on Instagram, it's fine, leave it. But like, if you are, you get things like Monday motions, and you get like updates and when the next masterclass is. And it's probably going to be really, really useful if you want to do well in national selections. So yeah, do that. Beyond that, thank you very much for joining. It was lovely taking the session. Yeah, and updates on Alan, my apologies. Yes. Cool.